Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The Honorable Dean of Faculty of Social and Political Science, Dr. Hardi Warsono. The Honorable Vice Dean of Academic and Student Affairs, Dr. Teguh Yuwono. The Honorable Head of Department of Political and Government, Dr. Kus Handayani. The Honorable Speaker and distinguished participant. First of all, let's pray to express our gratitude to God Almighty for the grace and the guidance to us all, so that we may gather in this ceremony. We welcome you to Universitas Diponegoro International Webinar with the theme of the webinar, Social Media Activism, Digital Resilience, and Resistance to Democratic Regression. Ladies and gentlemen, the first occasion is the opening speech from the Dean of Fakultas Social and Political Science to Bapak Dr. Hardi Warsono MTP, please.
Terima kasih. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Honorable Speaker, Keynote Speaker, Professor Budi Stiono Empol Admin PhD, Vice Rector of Universitas Diponegoro, distinguished speakers, Profesor Didi Rahmini, MSc PhD. Selamat malam, Pak Didi. Ya, Pak Didi, saya tahun 89-90 pernah jadi staf LP3IS di Klaten waktu Pak Bob Masin.
Ya.
Iya, waktu itu mau dipertemukan Pak Didi, tapi belum kesampaian. Akhirnya kesampaian malam ini. Bisa ketemu Pak Didi.
Ya, main-main kalau COVID selesai.
Iya. Profesor Merlina Lim, PhD, Carleton University. Yang terhormat Ibu Yatun Sastra Mijaya, PhD, Amsterdam, University of Amsterdam. Juwanto PhD, Mr. Wijayanto PhD, Honorable Moderator Junu Wenus Gulam Manar MSI. Selamat malam, Pak Moderator. Honorable Manager at Faculty of Social and Political Science, Vice Dean, Mr. Teguh Yuwono, Dr. Kus Handayani, Dr. Rina Martini, Dr. Lela, and so on. Honored guests, Professor, Kolega, committees, ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening to all of us. On behalf of the Faculty of Social and Political Sciences at Universitas Diponegoro, I would like to kindly welcome everyone to our webinar series held by Department of Politics and Government. I feel privileged and most especially grateful to have the opportunity to open and present this academic program, bearing in mind that we are still under a global crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, which has been practically inhibited us from doing a lot of works and activities since last year. Thanks to our technology and advancement, we are still able to organize programs through digital platform like the one we are doing this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, over past decades, Indonesia has been widely prized to be a country with democratic stability. After going through a highly successful democratic transition in 1998, Indonesia continues to maintain its democratic achievement by sustaining such as competitive general election, the freedom of the press and CSOs, room for grassroots and opposition, as well as fight against corruption. There has been a number of other fields requiring further improvement, but the general circumstance states that Indonesia has been indeed quite on track for organizing and maintaining a clean, professional, and transparent government. Digital work and it entailing consequences of digitalization of everything have been a dominant ingredient in modern-day democracy. Some of democratic features such media, public opinion, and public policy can now be fully operating and performing better, more open, transparent, and accurate with the help of digital platform. As one of the largest and arguably stable democracy in the world, it is intriguing to learn more about Indonesia's recent culture and its general stances toward this digitalization of democracy, especially when it comes to social media practices and the extent to which its people have been involved and receiving benefit to the fullest from this world. For the purpose, we have invited some distinguished experts, both from our campus and external campus alike, to give the insight and opinion on the matter. I would like to express my gratitude and thank all the speakers for making the time to be here and willing to share their deep knowledge and expertise here in our program this evening. We believe their competence will be highly relevant to our topic today, and their lecture will accordingly be insightful and rewarding to our webinar participants. Ladies and gentlemen, please do allow me to end this remark by wishing you all the delightful and informative talks and discussion. By saying Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, webinar series Department of Politics and Government with the title Social Media Activism, Digital Resilience and Resistance to Democratic Regression, officially opens. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Nani is still mute.
Termute sama hostnya.
Okay.
Thank you, Pak Hardi. Okay, ladies and gents, the following ceremony will be the key opening speech from the Vice Rector of Academic and Student Affairs, Prof. Budi Setiono. Since Prof. Budi cannot attend the occasion, we're going to play Prof. Budi record speech to the committee. Please play video.
Silahkan Mas Maskur.
Mas Maskur.
Mas Syahudin, ya.
Selamat malam, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah, syukurillah, terima kasih atas kesempatan yang diberikan kepada panitia. Pada webinar kali ini, saya diundang untuk menjadi pembicara yang ditugaskan untuk bertukar wacana seputar demokrasi dan konsolidasinya di Indonesia. Yang saya hormati Pak Dekan dan juga para narasumber serta para peserta webinar yang kami hormati. Topik tentang democratic consolidation ini adalah merupakan satu hal yang sangat urgent saya kira untuk kita diskusikan. Bukan hanya bahwa masa depan Indonesia itu akan sangat ditentukan oleh bagaimana kita bisa mempertahankan atau menjadikan demokrasi itu sebagai satu-satunya cara di dalam kita memerintah atau mengelola negara ini, tetapi juga bahwa demokrasi itu kita perjuangkan dengan darah dan air mata, khususnya Pada saat kita itu menumbangkan rejim Orde Baru di tahun 1998, kita mengeluarkan begitu banyak energi, kekuatan, dan juga tumpah darah anak-anak kita untuk mengantarkan bangsa kita menikmati kebebasan berekspresi, mengungkapkan pendapat, mengusulkan inisiatif, gagasan, ide di proses pembuatan kebijakan dan seterusnya, serta memastikan bahwa negara ini dikelola di dalam satu pola yang mengikuti dengan apa yang dikehendaki oleh rakyat. Sehingga tidak boleh di dalam perjalanan sejarah itu kita setback ke belakang dan menihilkan atau mengerdilkan atau bahkan meniadakan prinsip-prinsip dan nilai-nilai demokrasi, khususnya berkaitan dengan kebebasan mengembangkan pendapat, kebebasan di dalam melakukan kritik terhadap penyelenggaraan negara, kritik terhadap kebijakan-kebijakan dan anggaran pemerintah, atau juga hal-hal yang lain, mendiskursuskan bagaimana masa depan bangsa dan negara kita harus kita bentuk. Nah, untuk itu izinkan kami untuk perbaiki PowerPoint yang sudah kami buat. Nah, ini adalah merupakan topik yang saya kira seperti tadi saya katakan urgent untuk kita diskusikan, mengingat demokrasi itu kita perjuangkan dengan segenap pengorbanan dan adalah merupakan hak kita sebagai rakyat untuk memastikan bahwa apa yang kita perjuangkan itu betul-betul bisa kita nikmati dan tidak disia-siakan oleh orang per orang. Nah, pada saat sekarang ini banyak sekali para penulis peneliti yang mengemukakan tentang kemungkinan terjadinya defisit demokrasi di Indonesia atau setback demokrasi di Indonesia dengan berbagai macam terminologi, ya, seperti misalnya democratic recession ditulis oleh Michener 2019, lalu defective democracy, democratic setback, hadis misalnya jadi hadis 2017, democratic regression, democratic deconsolidation, democratic decline, authoritarian turn, democratic backslide, illiberal democracy, non-democratic pluralism, recession of democracy, neo-authoritarianism, authoritarian innovations. Ya, cukup banyak ragam terminologi yang dipakai menggambarkan tentang betapa proses konsolidasi demokrasi di Indonesia itu ada di dalam proses yang rawan, ya, untuk di-hijack atau dikurangi substansinya. Nah, beberapa penulis itu membuat definisi tentang democratic recession dan sebangsanya itu. Misalnya menurut Michener itu adalah a process in which democracies gradually lose their quality over time and which may or may not lead to a full democratic reversal. Proses di mana demokrasi itu secara gradual kehilangan kualitasnya dari waktu ke waktu dan bahkan mungkin akan menyebabkan tidak tercapainya kondisi full demokrasi di negara kita. Lalu juga the decline in silence of democratic cleavage, di mana saya kira hampir serupa, ya, bahwa ada ancaman terhadap proses dan kondisi demokrasi yang ada di negara kita. Dan juga menurut Warburton, proses yang berlangsung secara perlahan yang ditandai dengan situasi di mana aktor-aktor politik secara perlahan berpaling dari nilai-nilai dan institusi demokrasi. Ini tentu tidak serta-merta akan berjalan menuju kepada otoritarianisme, namun regresi demokrasi secara perlahan melahirkan tipe lain dari rezim politik yang tidak sepenuhnya demokrasi, namun juga tidak sepenuhnya diktator. seperti demokrasi iliberal atau sistem otoritarian yang kompetitif, rezim campuran dan sebagainya. Jadi tidak serta-merta kembali seperti situasi Orde Baru dan sebangsanya, tetapi yang jelas kualitas dari demokrasi itu menjadi tidak sepenuhnya full dinikmati oleh masyarakat. Dan tidak juga negara kita disebut sebagai negara gagal, tetapi beberapa pendapat dan juga misalnya ini dari IDEA mengklasifikasi negara kita sebagai termasuk salah satu negara yang declines in 1 to 3 aspect of civic space ya di dalam masa 2013 sampai 2018, dan kita dikategorikan sebagai negara yang decline on one aspect of civic space ya. Ini Indonesia termasuk di antara negara yang bersama Mongolia dan Filipina itu ada dikategorikan sebagai moderate democratic backsliding, ada kemunduran nilai demokrasi yang agak moderat, ya. Tidak termasuk negara yang gagal dan juga tidak termasuk negara yang otoritarian, tetapi kualitas demokrasinya berkurang. Ya. Nah, mengapa proses demokrasi dan konsolidasi demokrasi di negara kita itu masih lemah? Ini menurut pendapat saya karena ada beberapa hal yang menyebabkan hal itu terjadi. Yang pertama adalah democratic transition landscape are not always resistant to the influence of the system and political configuration being set up by past authoritarian regime. Ini ditulis oleh World Bank saya kira beberapa tahun yang lalu, kalau nggak 2000-2001, bahwa walaupun kita sudah melakukan proses transisi demokrasi sejak 98, akan tetapi political configuration yang disusun oleh masa Orde Baru itu masih bertahan ya, dalam beberapa aspek, termasuk juga dengan kenyataan bahwa tokoh-tokoh utama Orde Baru itu kemudian bercokol pada masa era reformasi dengan berbagai macam kamuflase ya, dan bahkan berhasil juga untuk menduduki jabatan-jabatan tinggi sekelas menteri misalnya. Jadi menteri-menteri, beberapa orang yang dahulu menjadi menteri di zaman Orde Baru ya menjadi Panglima ABRI dan seterusnya, kemudian menjadi menteri juga di zaman demokrasi, bahkan pada zaman Pak Jokowi menjabat saat sekarang ya, beberapa di antara mereka masih memerankan peran-peran yang sentral. Nah, di dalam konteks ini, democratic transition was not followed by a massive transformation of personnel in the bureaucracy, judiciary or military, or large-scale redistribution of power in the business sector. Termasuk juga di dalam konteks ini, stok-stok lama, pejabat-pejabat masa Orde Baru di dalam birokrasi, di dalam kehakiman, atau penegak hukum, di dalam militer, kepolisian, dan seterusnya, itu masih banyak terkooptasi oleh pola-pola laba, pola-pola Orde Baru, dan mereka bawa di alam demokrasi dan ingin membawa atau mengembalikan saya kira konsep dan pikiran yang dulu berkembang zaman Orde Baru di masa transisi demokrasi tersebut. Termasuk juga di dalam konteks ini adalah aktor-aktor bisnis ya. Kalau kita melihat siapa aktor bisnis sekarang, kebanyakan di antara mereka adalah mereka yang sudah sukses pada masa Orde Baru, termasuk juga para pelaku BLBI ya, yang mendapat privilege luar biasa ya. Mereka ketahui mendapatkan banyak sekali privilege serupa pada masa Orde Baru, dan sekarang mereka kembali mendapatkan kurang lebih perlakuan yang sama ya, kehormatan yang sama, kesempatan yang sama untuk mengembangkan bisnis-bisnis mereka. Nah, yang ketiga adalah democratization created political split, polarization, and social disorder. Harus kita pahami juga bahwa pada satu sisi proses demokrasi itu memberikan kebebasan kepada masyarakat, tetapi pada sisi yang lain menyebabkan perpecahan, polarisasi, dan social disorder yang menyebabkan masing-masing pihak itu cenderung untuk mengutamakan kepentingan-kepentingan pribadi dan golongannya dengan menggunakan teknik-teknik dan juga upaya metode yang bisa jadi bertentangan dengan prinsip-prinsip demokrasi itu sendiri, ya. Semua pihak berusaha untuk membenarkan apa-apa yang menjadi preferensinya dan juga melakukan tindakan-tindakan yang bertentangan dengan prinsip demokrasi, apakah itu manipulasi misalnya, atau pengekangan, penindasan, ya, teror, atau juga baik itu secara fisik maupun secara lisan. Dan kita yang mungkin nanti harus didiskusikan di dalam konteks media sosial, kita mendapatkan berkah yang luar biasa dari media sosial itu, akan tetapi kita melihat cara dari masing-masing pihak yang bersaing di era demokrasi itu menggunakan media sosial itu untuk meneror lawan, untuk menihilkan lawan, untuk membuat lawan itu menjadi tertekan dan seterusnya, ya, dengan kata-kata yang tidak sepantasnya dan seterusnya. Nah, ini saya kira juga menyebabkan konsolidasi demokrasi itu justru menjadi lemah, karena itu komunikasi yang secara verbal itu mengandung kekerasan itu akan menyebabkan terciptanya kekerasan itu sendiri. Dan tentu saja kekerasan adalah bukan cara demokratis untuk mengatasi masalah. Cara demokrasi di dalam mengatasi masalah itu adalah dengan diskursus, dengan prosedur di lembaga-lembaga formal atau lembaga-lembaga politik formal seperti di parlemen dan seterusnya. Kemudian yang keempat adalah citizens have little incentive to trust political and judicial system and have little experience of influencing public policy. Rakyat itu sendiri seringkali menjadi korban dari hoax yang diciptakan oleh para elit, dari para pasukan buzzer yang saling serang menyerang satu sama lain, sedangkan masyarakat umum itu tidak banyak mengetahui tentang apa yang sesungguhnya terjadi, dan juga mereka memiliki kekurangan di dalam konteks pengalaman untuk mengkonsolidasikan diri, memberikan masukan di dalam pengambilan keputusan dan seterusnya, dan pada akibatnya kemudian aspirasi rakyat itu menjadi tidak termanifestasikan, tertutupi oleh aspirasi yang by design itu diciptakan oleh masing-masing kekuatan politik untuk menggolkan tujuan-tujuan dari kepentingan politik mereka itu. Nah, lebih lanjut, proses incomplete democratic consolidation di negara kita itu juga disebabkan oleh ineffectual of judicial institutions, ya, tidak efektifnya lembaga-lembaga judisial, termasuk juga di dalam konteks ini sekarang ini yang menjadi keprihatinan kita adalah KPK. Ya, banyak orang berpendapat bahwa KPK yang sekarang ini tidak terlalu independen dan tidak terlalu kuat memiliki visi dan misi di dalam penegakan hukum, ya, sehingga kemudian tentu mengecewakan, ya. Belum lagi juga dengan institusi aparat penegak hukum yang lain, ya. Dan kemudian juga diakibatkan oleh shortcoming parliamentary supervision. Most political parties and politicians still maintain short-term goals in exercising their jobs. Nah, ini juga disebabkan kelemahan dari partai politik, dari parlemen dan juga partai politik dan para politisi, ya. Hampir semua partai politik itu sukanya menjadi bagian dari kekuasaan, tidak mau, ya, mereka berdiri sebagai oposisi. Dan tentu saja pemerintahan yang tanpa oposisi yang kuat, mereka bisa berbuat sekehendak hati, tidak ada kontrol yang memadai, dan tidak ada cara bagi partai politik untuk menyuarakan pendapat yang berbeda dengan apa yang dikehendaki oleh pemerintah. Kalau semua partai politik dioptasi oleh pemerintah, mereka menjadi bagian dari pemerintahan yang harus mensukseskan, mengatakan iya terhadap apa saja inisiatif-inisiatif dari pemerintah, maka tentu saja keseimbangan check and balance dalam pemerintahan itu menjadi tidak ada. Kita kembali kepada masa Orde Baru di mana semua kekuatan politik itu dikooptasi oleh pemerintah dan oposisi dibatasi, pendapat-pendapat yang berbeda itu dianggap musuh dan kemudian bisa jadi dikriminalisasi. Nah, saya kira itu adalah suatu hal yang tentu saja akan mengurangi kualitas demokrasi kita. Nah, ini juga dalam konteks ini beberapa penulis seperti misalnya Burton dan juga Michener mengemukakan bahwa pada satu sisi ide developmentalism yang dibuat oleh Pak Jokowi itu adalah suatu hal yang bagus, akan tetapi Pak Presiden Jokowi itu dianggap terlalu mengutamakan ya, exclusively focused on a narrow set of pragmatic economic programs, especially infrastructure, deregulation, and debureaucratization. Nah, dikhawatirkan oleh Warburton ini ide new developmentalism, pembangunan infrastruktur dan seterusnya yang diinisiasi oleh Pak Jokowi itu satu hal yang baik. Tetapi kalau itu terlalu fokus ke arah sana, itu akan mengurangi ya, minat dari pemerintah atau concern dari pemerintah di dalam membangun liberal demokrasi, ide liberal demokrasi dan pelindungan terhadap hak politik. Ya, jangan sampai juga sama halnya dengan zaman Orde Baru, ketika Orde Baru itu akan membuat bendungan raksasa, misalnya kita masih ingat peristiwa Kedungombo misalnya, itu hak-hak politik rakyat menjadi terkebiri ya. Bahwa pada satu sisi tentu rakyat membutuhkan adanya proyek-proyek raksasa, proyek-proyek infrastruktur, tapi kalau itu kemudian berimplikasi kepada berkurangnya hak-hak politik masyarakat, itu juga satu hal yang bisa dinilai sebagai kemunduran dari demokrasi itu sendiri. Lalu menurut saya juga Pak Jokowi has adopted a more passive approach by activating power tools not used in the days of autocracy. Misalnya Pak Jokowi itu dinilai oleh Millennials mengkooptasi kekuatan-kekuatan politik yang tadinya itu adalah sebenarnya oposisi atau lawan kompetisi, tapi kemudian dikooptasi untuk masuk di dalam kabinet, misalnya ya seperti Golkar maupun juga partai-partai yang lain. Nah itu secara umum juga hampir mirip dengan apa yang dipraktekkan pada zaman Orde Baru menurut Michener ini. Ya. Jadi tidak mengizinkan adanya oposisi yang kuat. Padahal sebenarnya oposisi yang kuat toh itu bisa juga untuk mengkoreksi, mempertajam, memperbaiki ya kebijakan-kebijakan yang dibuat oleh pemerintah. Nah sehingga pada kesimpulannya Bapak Ibu bahwa terdapat beberapa pendapat ilmuwan politik dari dalam maupun luar negeri Indonesia sekarang ini sedang mengalami proses kemunduran demokrasi yang dirumuskan dalam berbagai istilah tadi mulai dari regression, decline, backsliding hingga putar balik ke arah authoritarianisme, authoritarian turns dan authoritarianisme baru atau neo-authoritarian. Nah, ini adalah menjadi tugas kita semua tentang seberapa mampu kita akan memperkuat nilai-nilai demokrasi untuk dilanjutkan itu ditentukan tentu saja oleh pilar-pilar demokrasi seperti hanya pers, NGO, partai politik, kaum intelektual seperti kita di dalam membawa kembali demokrasi sebagai single game in town. Kita juga berharap agar pemerintah memperhatikan masukan-masukan dari para ilmuwan ini agar Indonesia tidak dinilai ya, sebagai negara demokrasi yang terkurangi kualitasnya. Saya kira demikian pengantar dari kami atas kesempatan yang diberikan oleh panitia. Saya ucapkan terima kasih dan mohon maaf saya tidak bisa berdiskusi secara langsung karena ada tugas lain yang harus saya kerjakan pada kesempatan kali ini. Saya kira Begitu, terima kasih sekali lagi dan sampai bertemu lain kesempatan. Selamat malam, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, tonight we will have 5 experts who will deliver their expert insight. The first speaker is Professor Merlina Lim from Carleton University. Hello, Prof. Lim.
Hello. Hi.
Okay. The second speaker is Dr. Yatun Sastramijaya from University of Amsterdam. Hello, Dr. Yatun. And the third speaker is Prof. Didi J. Rahbini, the representative of LP3ES. Malam, Prof. Didi.
Malam, Assalamualaikum.
Salam. The first speaker is Wijayanto PhD, a lecturer of the Faculty of Social and Political Science, Universitas Diponegoro. Malam, Mas Wija.
Malam, Bu Neni.
And the last speaker is Pak Yuwanto PhD, also a lecturer of the Faculty of Social and Political Science. Selamat malam, Pak Yu. The session will be moderated by Mas Zunuwanus Gulamanar, MSI. For the information, Mas Gulam is a lecturer in the Department of Politics and Government Science of Universitas Diponegoro with the academic interest in the innovation of government management and accountability field. To Mas Gulamanar, MSI, we invite you to be the moderator. Mas Gulam, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Mbak Neni. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the second webinar held by Department of Politics and Government, Universitas Diponegoro, in cooperation with Institute for Research, Education, and Information on Economy and Social Affairs, or LP3ES, with the title Social Media Activism, Digital Resilience, and also resistant to democratic regression. My name is Gulam, and I will be responsible for hosting this webinar. I'm glad to welcome a resource person for this webinar, Honorable Professor Didi Rahbini, Professor Merlina Lim, Dr. Yatun, Dr. Wijayanto, and also Dr. Yuwanto. Democratic regression actually raising our concern as well as awareness whether the path of democracy in Indonesia in the right way, pivoting, or even worse, turning back compared to the previous regime. So this evening, we'd like to reveal what really happened in Indonesia democracy from different kind of perspective. The main section of this webinar will consist of presentation from 5 speakers and also discussion. It is important to note for the participant to turn off the microphone during the session. You may ask question to the speaker using chat room or directly asking the resource person during the discussion. For administration, including list of attendees and certificate, please pay attention to the chat room. And this webinar will be start with Professor Merlina Lim with topic on internet and democracy, followed by Dr. Yatun Sastramijaya with civil society movement. And then the third is Professor Didi Rahbini with initiative of promoting civil society activism, followed by Dr. Wijayanto with Academic Alliance on Anti-Corruption. And the final is Dr. Yuwanto with promoting civic engagement and democracy. Each speaker will have 20 minutes of presentation. Distinguished speaker, ladies and gentlemen, it is time to start the webinar with first topic on internet and democracy. The speaker, Professor Merlina Lim, currently serves as Canada Researcher in Digital Media and Global Network Society with School of Journalism and Communication, Charlton University of Canada. Her research mostly revolves around the mutual shaping of technology and society, and also political culture of technology, including several aspects of relation of justice, democracy, and also civic engagement. Professor Merlina Lim earned a postgraduate degree on architecture, while PhD degree of anthropology for University of Twente. I think it is very interesting because most of the participant is undergraduate student, and maybe they can also ask about the shift of the focus of the interest of Professor Merlina Lim. Professor Merlina Lim also have interesting personal blog contents from her publication and also music that's very interesting. And we can access the blog to merlinalim.org. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Merlina Lim.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. Selamat malam. Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you to Mas Wija for inviting. Actually, I need to share my screen, so I'm waiting for the IT or the host to just make me a co-host. So when I was asked by Wija to present, and I actually never really submit my title. I wasn't aware that I had to submit, so I think Wija made up a title for me, which is fine, which is very appropriate. But I sort of like tweaking the title just to sort of represent what I will be talking about. So this year, I've been doing research on this for 20 years. Started in my 20s, meaning that I've been through those things that we were talking about, right? So my research is actually covering pre-98 to the so-called democratic regression that we've been talking about earlier in the morning. Just an overview is at some point last couple of years ago, I was asked to map my research, which actually literally this is actually my life, right? It's like half of my life, and most of my research predominantly about Indonesia. And when it comes to debate and discourse that I intervene, literally these are even though I use empirical finding from other countries, I think I anchor my theorization and conceptualization in Indonesian context. And I think while probably some people who read certain stuff, they would say, oh, my research is about questioning the role of the internet in supporting or hindering democracy, but that's actually not quite the question that I was posing. I think I had to always bring up the question about the relationship between internet or social media or digital media with democracy, because that's what people keep talking about. But I think it is an oversimplified and actually a misleading question to ask, does internet promote democracy? Because that's oversimplified the relationship between technology and society in itself, and especially the relationship between technology and politics. So my take on digital media and politics, which is literally also is about relationship, about how society and technology are shaping each other. I keep arguing, and the big picture is that the relationship is need to always be contextualized within techno, media, political, and socioeconomic landscape. And of course, I'm not doing all of this, right? I'm not an economist. I don't usually look at the socioeconomic aspect that much, but I think that should be kept in mind. So this is the techno landscape currently, right? I will not discuss this, but this is so vastly different if compared to 20 years ago when Indonesia started the democratic in transition. The population has changed, and especially the middle class here is actually growing from 75 million in 2012. And I think it was half of that in early 2000. And now in 2020, it's 140 million. But it's also mean there is like with the growing middle class, there is a higher inequality. You could see the Gini coefficient. So these are background that we need to keep in mind. When it comes to political landscape, we could talk about a lot of things, but electoral politics is one thing, right? We've been talking about democratization. Yes, there are more political parties. There are electoral as a politic, as a procedural democracy. But essentially, if you look at the biggest party, who are these actors, right? Probably sometimes we have new names, but who are behind this? Whose money, whose power, right? We deal with new name, new term, new parties, but we look at actually essentially similar player throughout the years. And I'm talking about media landscape. We are talking about, this is the map that I made quite a long time ago, but it is still true in terms of big picture that it is, and actually become worse than this because the media has become more concentrated. And if you look at some kind of episodes of electoral politics, you would see that this has much influence in the way the discourse of politics and how people collectivize around issues, political issues, reflect the concentration of media as well. And then where are our internet users? Even though there's growing, we still actually look at upper. So yes, they're growing internet user, but it's growing on upper middle class and upper class, but not necessarily on lower class. And also, yes, it's growing in Jakarta and in Java, but not in rural areas, but only in urban areas, and certainly not in Papua or other countries or other places. So that's the landscape. And this is kind of like snapshot of my research. I take a look at, we were 1990 to 98. So I did my dissertation in 2005. I look at the sort of historical context of the internet and politics. Basically, what we see that the internet was used for collective action against, as a sort of like anti-authoritarian movements, which essentially work through the reductions of complexities. So it was democratic, but at the same time, it was not like we had ideal public spheres. And internet play very important role in simplifying, right, the sort of like complex message. And then 98 to 98 with the same, that kind of reduction, binary discourse, anti-something, we against you. With identity politics, we have a different one. The mode is the same, the technology is the same, except the content was changed into the more tribal nationalism and identity politics. And then you have blogs and Facebook and then also Twitter later on from 2006 on. So you see the new thing, which is like entertainment and play in politics, popular culture type, and the beginning of algorithmic activism, where visibility, virality, and the economic of attentions become more amplified. of course, you have good examples, such as Prita, for example, or Gecko versus Crocodile, anti-capital, but these are not the entire story, right? You might have good outcome, but it's not necessarily represent even the good outcome. It's complex and problematic in itself in terms of the mode and processes, because it's always went through some kind of technological bias that makes certain movement visible, but the more complex one, including the more important issue being hijacked by the bias within technology society relationship itself. And then it carry on because we have the first example of electoral politics that is through mobile social media. From 2012, actually, Indonesia entered the new era, which is mobile social media, kind of like a platform as the most dominant. And then, so you see the culmination that we have better representative. However, it still went through, they were elected and their campaigns were organized through populism, right? Since populism versus populism, it's not necessarily like one is more democratic or nationalistic and the other is fundamentalist. I think both, all of the players were populist leader, and it was very binary. And we have seen fragmented voters and what I call as algorithmic enclaves, which I will bring you to that earlier, since 2012. So we don't have middle ground, which is anti-Ahok later, right? Actually started with this, anti-Jokowi and Ahok, right? It was two camps. If you are on the third camp, you have no space. And it went on, 2017, 2018, this binary politics went on, and you have grassroots, but it is not necessarily grassroots rational activism, because what you see, you have activism, yes, grassroots activism, true activism, but also grassroots social movement, but at the same time, you have different type of grassroots. This is grassroots fandom that could be on the good side, on bad side, or it doesn't matter, right? But these are the modes, and that is what happening not only in Indonesia but also in other countries. So, looking at those sort of 20 years, over 20 years, what would they see? I think there are change and there are continuity. There is used to be radical opposition, whether it's from 98 to now is more about polarized fragmented spheres. It used to be against states, right? Like one modes now is a fan-based popular culture. The control censorship used to be concentrated on the state. Now is participatory, what I call participatory network panopticon. The players were global, local. There are some entities in 98 that were abroad precisely because there's so much control within Indonesia. But now we have seen local players. Deliberation happened in the small group, but now is more enclaves within the enclave deliberation, which is what I call algorithmic enclaves. It was mass mobilization becoming populist mobilization. Social movement and collective action were acted by intermodality of alternative media, old and new. Now it's actually the media ecology has become more network. It's not like there is a dominant one. It's social media feeding into the more traditional, and it's going back. It's like fluid feedback, right? It's very network, and I think it was ephemeral. It was ad hoc. It was not. It was most of the activism, but right now is even more so. It's speed up. Is here and now. It's issue based. It's very chronopolitics kind of thing. So, what kind of implication that's I think there are a lot of conceptual and theoretical implication through this empirical finding, but I don't have that much time, so I will just mention three. The first big difference is that the relationship between digital media and politics changed the way political communication being practiced all over the world, but also in Indonesia. So yes, it was kind of marketing, but it was more like political communication was propaganda, right? Currently, what we've seen is not propaganda per se, but it is political communication is marketing politics, which is there is a shift between controlling the message to branding, personalization is working through affect, right? Emotion, personal publicity, which is very fit with social media, how social media work as a tool for corporations. So between politics and marketing, where data segmentation and targeting become the big language, that's what happened within political practices, political communication practices in Indonesia. Second, on the level of human level, is the role of not the role of algorithm per se, but the role of interaction between human user and algorithm. And so social media algorithm, let's say, is a complex thing, is a complex algorithm, but essentially their underpinning typology is a sorting algorithm. So in which an algorithm that put elements of a list in numerical or lexicographical order. So the combination between sorting principle and it focused on targeted advertisement resulted in an algorithm that is biased toward the superlative. So as this sorting principle is applied to everyday interaction among social media users, so content that has superlative value is most likely to be pushed up the hierarchy of importance. So if it is in the middle, it's very hard to be visible because algorithm essentially help advertising companies to simplify the audience. Is girls and boys, blue and pink. So that's why you have these two binary. The binary politic, therefore, become more extreme as they take place, the discourse take place in social media. And then sort of like creating this kind of algorithmic enclave, which is a discursive arena where individuals, afforded by their constant interaction with algorithm, interact with each other and collectivize based on a perceived shared identity online. Usually, they think because they have a common enemy rather than similarity in terms of ideology and thoughts and opinions and interests. So and the third one is the way control and people collectivize. This is about power relation. This is in the pre-social media, right? It's linear, right? It's like two. There is a state and authority, traditional, and then you have control. But what we see it in the what we see here is we see in the social media, we see the rise of bottom-up distributed network of proliferation of surveillance watching from below, which is good sometimes, right? Because this surveillance culture suggests that citizens will be better able to keep tabs on the activities of those in power. However, such a social trend also could manifest as vigilantism, and moreover, facilitating the emergence of network panopticon. So the bottom-up, all-seeing many eyes that put citizens as watchmen to control the behavior of other citizens, sometimes on behalf of the authority. And so this changed the way we see this thing. So I'll put everything together here. Like I said earlier, there are still activism, a lot of activism. we see. And then they have democratic ideal. Or this, having said that, as you take it on social media, you kind of like trapped within that the binary, trapped within the schematic algorithm that is so schematic that is actually facilitate division, exclusionary algorithm enclaves. And you also trap in the modes of that digital grassroots fandom that seemingly have more leverage. They have more power within, which is of course helped by cyber trolls, cyber bot, micro celebrities, and other things. This is kind of explain this one is kind of explain what's going on, why we see what we have seen. That's why nationalism, populism become prominent. And here I'm not saying that this is bad, except this is just, I'm being pragmatic to see this is what's going on. So there are hope, like I said, there are the digital grassroots activism, there are hope, there are youth, there are justice movements, there are feminist movements, they're working. But we also have to keep in mind that they are working in the environment as well. They are not free from the constraint that is happening, not only because of social media per se or algorithm per se, but because of the interaction, right? And a longitudinal interaction and shaping of the politics within this platform. I have 0 seconds. Exactly 20 minutes. Okay, that's the end of my. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Merlina Lim, for the insightful presentation. And we can notice that how social media and digital world really influencing politics and vice versa. Now we move to the second presentation by Dr. Yatun Sastra Mijaya on topic of civil society movement. Dr. Yatun currently serves as assistant professor in anthropology at the University of Amsterdam, where she also obtained her PhD in anthropology. Her research interests including youth and student activism, political culture, democratization, citizenship, and also digital infrastructure in Indonesia. So, Dr. Yatun, the screen is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Mas Gulam. I'll just share my screen. Yeah, you can see it, right? Yeah, first of all, thank you for inviting me. I feel very honored to be part of this illustrious panel. Dan Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Have a good evening for this di dalam bulan puasa ini. So I have to say, I didn't realize that I was supposed to prepare my presentation in English. Jadi sebenarnya saya sudah bersusah payah untuk mencoba mempersiapkan presentasinya dalam bahasa Indonesia, but that's okay because I actually speak better in English. So let me just start. I give my presentation today the title Ritsum versus Regime, Opportunities and Challenges of Digitally Mediated Youth Protest. So this is a bit more specific than the topic of civil society movements as I was assigned to speak about. Because it is different from civil society movements as we know it. And this is what I try to explain today here. Now, let me start with explaining the concepts that are in the main title here, Ritsum versus regime. Now, for the regime part, that one is perhaps a bit more clear, right? A regime, the concept of regime, it indicates a system of governments that is hegemonic in the sense of dominant, not only in the field of politics, but also in political culture, ideology, political economy, etc. And actually, hegemony is something that is very, I mean, that's common everywhere. There's no place without hegemony, you could say. But that dominance can move towards authoritarianism, as outlined actually in the first speech by the Dean, Pak Hardi Warsono. it can move towards authoritarianism if that hegemony is actually, it needs to be enforced by force, by all kinds of different tools and mechanisms of power, because there appears to be a trust deficit. So a deficit of trust and legitimacy, in particular among the larger society. So this is why all these mechanisms, and we will see that these are more and more digital mechanisms of power that are being mobilized in order to enforce that hegemony, which is not naturally there. And that kind of authoritarian regime, of course, we know that very well from Orde Baru, and where the hegemony was also never total and never complete, but always faced challenges from below, from the middle field, and especially from the student movement, which is famous for that role, but also labor movements, other social movements. But what I want to discuss today is that today's hegemonic regime is actually no longer facing the same kind of challenge of the same kind of, old type of social movements, but is facing the challenge of a very different kind of force, which I will characterize by the concept of ritsom. So to explain what ritsom actually means, I think it's easiest to contrast it with the concept of roots, which is more familiar. So roots versus ritsom, the changing logics of mobilization. So roots, so akar, to understand the political implications of a concept like roots or rootedness, we can use the example of, again, the student movement, which I did my PhD thesis on. And it becomes very clear that the student movement is one of those national figures that is very strongly tied and rooted, indeed, in national history, historiography, in national political mythology, and all that packed in a sort of national or the dominant narrative of a national struggle. But because that narrative has been distorted to a very great extent by those in power, where the student movement was also constructed as a moral force or an agent of history that is completely separated from other grassroots forces in society, we can see how this rootedness in this narrative, in this historical narrative, also becomes a very strong burden to the student movement. Because, of course, this myth, it really holds them in its grip. It kind of dictates all the repertoires of action that the student movement should fulfill, and this is why we also see, as I will show it later on, the student movement having been in decline. But that doesn't mean that youth protest has also disappeared from the stage in the past years. But what we see now is a very different kind of youth mobilization emerging, and a much more fluid and organic kind of form, which we can characterize by borrowing from Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari the term rhizomatic assemblage. Now, rhizomatic assemblage, according to Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari, it's the quintessential feature of, it's a new logic of collectivity, of organization that is very fitting to the era of late capitalism. And they say, well, rhizomatic assemblage is something that really doesn't comply with the logics of organization that we know from the modern era, because it is characterized by 4 principles that really represent a break with that kind of organization. And they identify these 4 principles as, first of all, connectivity. And connectivity can be both literal, through, for instance, digital connectivity, but also more imaginative connectivity, where you link up with different imaginations that are not necessarily your own. A second principle is heterogeneity, where a group is no longer a homogeneous group, but it becomes an assemblage of all kinds of different groups coming together and then breaking apart again and coming together again around different kinds of issues and concerns. Multiplicity is the third principle, where this kind of assemblage is constantly multiplying and constantly expanding in very new directions. And finally, I think the most important one is what they call A signifying rupture. I found that a very difficult idea myself, but it basically means that, you know, if part of the rhythm breaks off, for instance, in the middle part, it doesn't mean that the organization, the collectivity, the assemblage dies out, right? Because there's still the other parts, and they continue to grow and expand, and might again then meet in the middle when they grow together again. So this idea of rhythmatic process has been used also to describe this kind of the kind of new youth-led movement that we've seen happening in the past decade. And Joanne Lim, actually, so not Marlena Lim, but Joanne Lim, who is a professor in Singapore in communication science, she used that concept to describe the youth movements that have been, you know, emerging in the wake of the Bersih movement in Malaysia. And she says, well, this rhythmatic process, it creates a very powerful sense of organic community among these youth, which for participants in this movement also engenders a very different kind of unified purpose of change, where change can mean anything, but is at least something that binds them together. Now, moving on to the next, actually, you know, considering the time, I won't go into all this theory here, but to understand how this rhythmatic assemblage with its sense of organic community could come about, it's important to understand that the sense of citizenship of, you know, a lot of young people have shifted in the past decades. And here I have to, of course, make the qualification, like Marlena also just pointed out, that youth, if we talk about this particular, you know, group, being active in these kind of movements, it's very clearly a very restricted kind of sub-cohort of this demographic. Indeed, upper and middle class, you know, very much urbanized. And of course, you know, also having the kind of economic as well as cultural, social capital in order, you know, to be able to engage in this kind of thing. But among this particular group, there's a very interesting shift going on. Not just, this is a global kind of trend that has been theorized by several scholars, where, you know, the sense of citizenship has, for instance, Russell Dalton, the political scientist, he has identified a generational shift, what he calls it, from duty-based citizenship to this more engaged kind of citizenship, which is much more flexible and much more not given, but something that is constantly in the process of becoming. And it is constantly in the process of being made as well. And the way it is made is through what Ingin Aysin has called acts of citizenship. So you're not a certain type of citizen because that's been given to you, but you claim that citizenship through the act of claiming the rights associated with that. So the big question for me is then, do we indeed see, not just in Indonesia, but also throughout Southeast Asia, a new kind of, you know, democratic citizenship emerging in these kind of youth movements that we see happening there? Now, underlying all this, this process is what Raymond Williams has called a generational shift in structure of feeling, right? Which by which he refers to this very emergent and not yet codified, so belum baku, all these counter ideologies that are emerging in the acts of manifesting them. In these very fluid kind of collectives with very fluid boundaries and very eclectic orientations. And this is something that has been shared because it's so emergent, because it's not yet codified, that has been, you know, it can easily travel across borders. It can easily travel across subgroups within borders. And finally, you know, in terms of social movement theory, Bennett and Segerberg, they have theorized this as the rise of, you know, the shift actually from what we know as the logic of collective action, which occurs through these very strict organizations and mobilization repertoires, towards this much more ephemeral, you know, like Marlena also said, this much more fluid, kind of personalized connective action, where the connectivity as the first principle of rhythmatic assemblage is actually a key defining feature of that. And this has very important implications for political identity as well. Not political identity in terms of specific political groups or ideologies, but the political identity associated with youth, which is, at least in their own imagination, is shifting very strongly from this very fixed idea of the student activist, right, to this much more flexible idea of activist youth. And they share a sort of a few characteristics, which are very important also to understand how things are organized today. First of all, they shun ideologically rigid, cohesive, hierarchical political organizations. Second, and this is extremely important, they reject and transcend existing political fault lines. So all the kind of polarization, all the kinds of binary politics that Melina has also talked about, that results and are also, sustained by these algorithmic enclaves online, they are very much aware of that and try to transcend it by just basically also ignoring it, but also rejecting it very vocally so. Not left, not right, not Prabowo or Jokowi or whatever kind of fault lines they are, not red shirt or yellow shirt in Thailand, but their own identity. And again, they're also driven by much more eclectic concerns. They have certain issues they are targeting, but all these issues are bound together by this very broad sense of justice and rights as the basic fundamental concern that they are fighting for. And because of all this nebulousness and everything, they're also very much emotionally and affectively attuned to this translocal structure feeling. So there is, you can't really say there's an Indonesian youth structure feeling in this sense. It's much more broader, and they are very much aware that it is a generational kind of sensibility. Now, in Indonesia, the emergence of this kind of new type of youth movement, it is actually already visible in several conditions or developments that we've seen happening. First of all, of course, the decline of the traditional student movement, which was no longer as necessary as it was in the new order in the era of reform. And also because, they no longer, their whole repertoires of action, repertoires of identity also of the student movement no longer really appeals to a lot of cosmopolitan contemporary youth. It no longer fits their everyday experience. The second condition is what Madlina Lim has also already outlined, the rise of, this netizen power, especially since the late 2000s, with these cases like Koin Untuk Berita and Cicak Lawan Buaya. And even though, despite all the limitations that the technological biases also that Madlina has pointed out, it still engendered something new among, this netizen demographic. And that is the sense of participation in politics. Because even in the liberated political sphere, in the era, since 1998, where a lot of political parties emerged and everything, youth were generally still excluded from that political sphere. But online, they found a space, where they could actually participate in politics and could do so in their own ways, using their own language, manifesting their own positions and perspectives and opinions and everything. Plus, it was not just participating, but it's also a creative form of participation, which was also something that was new. Because all these messages, they didn't just pass on messages, by simply sharing messages, that they found online or that was given to them, more top-down way of political communication, but they co-created these messages, and it was user-generated. So that also, generated a certain kind of political agency, sense of political agency that was absent in previous forms of organization. And because some of these campaigns were really successful, it also generated a sense of empowerment, influence, and participation again. Now, the third, and this is also very important, is the profound disillusionment that is very common among this generation, not just with any political authority figures, but with the whole political establishment as such. There was a huge disappointment, obviously, by the outcome of the post-1999 political reform, which didn't bring the promised democracy. There was also a huge disenchantment with post-2014 Jokowi's broken promise of finally reinstating the rule of law, human rights, and just full democratic participation. This disappointment did not necessarily lead them to turn their backs on politics, but it, you know, as Gerard Zigan also said, for actually a very different context in Russia, disappointment can also be a source of political agency. It can also be a source of a different state of mind that enables creative experimentation with an otherwise. It's a very interesting theory, but I just wanted to put up this quote here. Because all this is just background to understand what we really saw happening in September 2019 with the rise of this sudden mobilization of youth across the country under the banner of Reformasi Korupsi. Now, it was very interesting that in the press, both the national press and the international press, it was still the same old narrative of, you know, the re-emergence, revival of the student movement that was on the foreground. But if you look at the field, both the field in the streets, but also in social media, so the virtual kind of field, you saw a very different kind of movement emerging actually and happening. And maybe this meme kind of explains that well, or at least I think it starts to explain well what happened there, which shows the golongan mahasiswa serius, so the serious students, aka the student movement or student activists, striking fists with golongan mahasiswa tukang mem, so mem-loving netizen youth. Striking fists and then creating a very different kind of power than we've seen before. And here are just some images that must be familiar to all of you, you know, the different kind of protest imagery that you suddenly saw on the streets with a very different kind of humor, you know, the kind of humor that you would normally see circulating online on social media, but not on the streets in a serious protest. And, you know, these protest signs, they were very much highlighted in the press also because they were lucu, yeah, they were funny. But it's not just lucu. I mean, humor has a very, you know, in political theory, you can also find theories on that, how humor actually expands political imagination and allows people to really connect with political messages on a very different kind of level than compared to when somebody says, well, this is our political message, take it or leave it. So when we see here, you know, all these statements, which are very serious statements, when we see them juxtaposed with this much more funny kind of protest signs, then it becomes, you know, both of them become part of themselves. It's not just someone else's message that they relay, but it's as much part of themselves as it is, you know, as the humor that they also carry on these protest signs. So that makes it very significant politically. Now, coming back to this Ritsum idea, especially the unbreakable part of that, the asignifying rupture, this is also what we saw when, you know, the protest was interrupted, first of all, by repression, harsh, violent repression, and then by the pandemic. This didn't stop, actually, the movement, you know, the protest. It just continued online, and it continued online much stronger than it ever did because it was fueled by the experience of street protest. And so there were a lot of concerted online social media actions where they created this kind of power. This is from our colleague Ismail Fahmi, where the contra omnibus law, you know, voice clearly outshone at that moment still the pro-omnibus law voice that was mobilized through, you know, buzzers and influences paid by the government. Top trending, they really reached the top trending list on Twitter. And again, you know, with Talak Omnibus Law, when it finally went to the streets again after the law was implemented ahead of its time, we again saw the same kind of dynamic where online and offline kind of repertoires and new kind of forms of protest also interacted very closely with each other. Obviously, the role of K-poppers was very big, both online and also on the streets. Here's a game that my friend Pradeep Rasidi actually pointed me to, Among Us, which also became a new site for recruiting and explaining the movement to other youth who were not active yet in the movement. So in this way, it continued to expand to all kinds of new youth publics. I'm just going to skip this one because of time. The difference between September 2019 and September 2000 or October 2020, when Talak Omnibus Law happened, was that the regime had also learned. Especially, they had learned from what happened in August. This was August 2020, and they decided, okay, we need different weapons than just the usual repression to quell this protest. And what that new tactic was revealed in a leaked telegram, actually, on 5 October, where the National Police really instructed all its divisions to use counter narratives against the protest. And I found this, I think Vijay is going to talk more about this, but I find this very striking because it means a huge expansion of the job description of the police, which is not necessarily very democratic, of course. The separation of this clear division of labor and tasks that you have in a democracy, which is now becoming blurred. So they have a new dwi-fungsi policy, you could say, not just protecting the people from these anarchists, but also to build a new hegemonic counter-narrative against the counter-narratives of these activists. I'm going to quickly wrap up. So here you see how that worked both in mainstream media and through buzzers that were mobilized on social media. The delegitimation, which was really concerted, really organized and orchestrated this time, and very effective because of that, because the protest stopped. Right, and there was no longer a lot of criticism in public sphere about the omnibus law, which is, of course, doesn't mean that the criticism has somehow disappeared. It just was no longer visible. It was no longer audible. It was no longer present in the public sphere. So what we see now, and I think also Vijay will tell a bit more about that, is how the digital sphere, which became, the arena where new kinds of political sensibilities, new kinds of political action repertoires, etc., emerged, now became dominated by the regime, the other word in my title. And this has become a very strong force, through digital manipulation, intimidation, policing, and repression. These can all be considered very effective authoritarian innovations, as Nicole Quirota and Diogo Fossati have recently theorized, where democratically elected governments like Jokowi's government, it really enables them through these innovations to enforce more authoritarian kind of policies and directions. Obviously, this is a threat to democracy and at the same time a symptom of a failing democracy. Again, remember, going back to what Pa Hadi Warsono was saying at the opening, it indicates, or it really causes also the shrinking of civil space, both online and offline. It has a very chilling effect on democracy, and it's very stifling of online public spheres. But does this also mean that, this youth phenomenon has suddenly been repressed and quelled? Well, obviously, the answer is no. And this is, I'm much more hopeful than a lot of my colleagues. And the resilience that I see there is very real, because these youth, they are not fully dependent and also not fully focused on the national public sphere that is now being increasingly controlled. Instead, they can look, as they did before, across borders. They can find inspiration across borders, and this is what they see then, right? Across Southeast Asia, the same kind of the same kind of assemblage of youth has been mobilizing in a very, very spectacular manner, both online and offline, where the online and offline spheres of action also are blurring, are really interacting, creating new kinds of spaces for action. Obviously, this is Thailand, but also in the Philippines, things are roaring. I really predict that Philippines will be the next big thing in protest, maybe next year, where they also use the game Animal Crossing, like they did in Hong Kong, to perform their protest against President Duterte's anti-terrorism bill. And this is Myanmar, of course. Most recently, it's ongoing. It's absolutely horrible what's going on there. And it's also very hopeful because, they are not scared. They are not broken by repression. They are not even broken by the blackout of the internet, which I find fascinating. It just continues. And that, I think, is a very important source of inspiration, actually for myself as well, but also for other youth in Indonesia and everywhere, where they have experienced mass mobilization that has then been in decline because of digital authoritarianism. And one very important manifestation of this kind of mutual inspiration is the emergence of regional solidarity and affinity networks, which become a very strong source of resilience for these youth. The Milk Tea Alliance recently has, not just included Indonesia, but also Myanmar, so that it really becomes a sort of Pan-Asian kind of indeed social media-based alliance, and indeed it's very much its own algorithmic enclave, but still it is expanding things that weren't there before. And I think this is a very important development because, they continue to, regardless of repression, because that's been happening in all these countries, which have seen an authoritarian term. It's not just in Indonesia, it's really regional, if not global. And this, keeps them going. They learn from each other's tactics, they support each other's causes, and that is solidarity, of course, but affinity is even stronger than that, because affinity is about a sense of kinship, the idea that, yes, we are actually one, you are my sister and brother, despite borders between us, and we will fight the same fight together. So in the end, this is my concluding slide. I just wanted to show that, yes, these youth citizens really are, with all the limitations and all the biases and everything, they are indeed nonetheless prefiguring a new mode of democratic citizenship in the region, which is completely out of their own making. And yeah, just to conclude, obviously they will not, in Myanmar, probably they will not be able to overthrow the regime by themselves. Defeating a hegemonic regime is impossible without broader political and grassroots alliances, whether it's national alliances or the support of the United Nations, for instance, or ASEAN. But even though it's a mission, or seems to be a mission impossible, it still has the effect that these youth movements engender micro-level transformations in political culture, in their own political subjectivities, and on the long term, this will have the biggest effect on politics that is turning, political landscapes that are turning increasingly authoritarian. So I will stop here. Thank you. Oh,
Thank you, Dr. Yaton, for your thoughtful remarks. You bring several examples from the ASEAN countries, and also it will inspire our students because the student movement also happen in different kind of country. Ladies and gentlemen, activism and digital world right now is kind of two sides of coin. We cannot distinguish one another. Otherwise, we will lose the contact and also the dynamic of activism itself. Now, it is our privilege to have Professor Didik J. Rahbini, the chairperson, or in bahasa ketua pengurus dari LP3S. Professor Didik will share the ideas on promoting civil society activism, and Professor Didik earned his graduate degree on development studies from Central Luzon State University, the Philippines. Ladies and gentlemen, please, Professor Didik J. Rahbini.
Thank you, Chairman, Moderator. Yeah. Let me share my PowerPoint. Yeah. Can you see, Pak? Pak Gulam?
Yes, clearly, Prof.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah. The Dean, Pak Hardi Warsono, and Vice Dean, and all the chairman of department, yeah, and all speaker already spoke, Prof. Lim and Ibu Yatun, yeah, with the very good speech, yeah, this evening, yeah. I just want to present only the role of the non-government organization in promoting democracy, yeah? Especially in this time of digital revolution. Yeah? This is just only one institution, but I think we have a little bit significant role in promoting democracy in Indonesia. because since the beginning in 1971, yeah, LP3S established. Afterward, the communication with the Orde Baru is not so close, yeah, and even sometimes like Tom and Jerry, yeah, meaning LP3S played the role, to control the government, yeah, at that time, yeah. Let me start the. Gimana nih Pak? Gak bisa ya? Sorry.
Yeah, the right, yeah,
okay.
the right,
Okay.
yeah, okay.
Okay.
History.
Our institution, yeah, LP3S was established in 1971. So this August we will be 50 years, yeah. And this is a long history of the non-government organization that born in 1971. At that time, you can imagine that we are still less developed countries, yeah. And then the poverty almost half at the time. And scarcity, there is no computer, yeah. So this is the pioneering, yeah, non-government organization, yeah. The people involved in this institution, like Abdurrahman Wahid, yeah, Professor Sumitro, yeah, the father of Prabowo Subianto, Daum Raharjo, and others, yeah. And now me, Pak Wija, yeah, Mas Herlambang, and others involved in the new generation, yeah, continuing this effort, to give contribution to the democracy. Yeah. There are three main objectives of LP3S, yeah, since 1970s, yeah. The first, yeah, to disseminate knowledge in social science through publication books, yeah. We publish 100 books, yeah, scientific journal, Prisma exhibition, and so on, yeah. You can imagine in 1972, 73, I was junior high school, yeah, senior high school, in hand, yeah, in Madura, in Pamekasan. In my hand, only one book, yeah. If we want to read the story about Malin Kundang and so on, we have to go to the library, and the library is half empty, yeah. So contribution of LP3S to disseminate knowledge is quite significant. And the second, to promote justice of open civil society and to that promote democracy, human rights, and environment. Yeah. So democracy, human rights, and environment is the focus of LP3S. And the other, the field research action, yeah, to eradicate poverty through pesantren. Yeah. Why pesantren? Yeah, because pesantren is very, very less developed communities at the time, yeah. Pesantren now, yeah, after 50 years, we have already professor from pesantren, yeah, PhD holders and so on, yeah. Also informal sector community and small scale industry. That's the general picture of LP3S. Yeah? This is Prisma in 1971. You can imagine the paper is simple, yeah. And if we trace, yeah, Prisma from 1970 to 2021, yeah, 2021, the best scholars wrote in this journal, yeah. And if we want to trace the history of thinking of the Indonesian scholar, you just collect all Prisma from 70s to 2020, yeah. You will get the thesis or dissertation about the thinking of best scholar in Indonesia. Yeah? So there are at least, yeah, related with this topic, yeah, promoting democracy in digital era, yeah. At least we have 7, not 5, yeah, sorry. We have 7 activities to promote democracy. Yeah? The first, we establish polling center. Yeah? This is very important for LP3S because polling is the very scientific approach to predict the election. Yeah? So this is to avoid cheating in the election, and this is to promote democracy. Yeah, and then weekly publication. Yeah, Pak Wija and others and other scholars. Yeah, Forum 100 Club. Yeah, we are together with the 100 scholars from Indonesia, young and old, yeah, from Indonesia and from other global, to work together and to discuss and to publish the book, yeah. Maybe the result, yeah, the product will be 1,000 pages of the book that will be released in setengah abad, yeah, of LP3S. Yeah. And then we have outlook Indonesian democracy. Yeah. We evaluate, yeah, for example, in 2000, at the end of 2020, we evaluate the democratic condition, situation, and then we predict, yeah, the outlook 2021. Yeah. And then we have Sekolah Demokrasi, 100 applicant, but we only select 20 or 30 participant of this. And then 6 with Ibu Yatun, we have digital democracy, cyber troop activities research, yeah, Pilpres, Pilkada, and so on. And then now we have already Center for Media and Democracy to maintain relationship with the media. Why? Because even our discussion only 80%, yeah, in Zoom, and then 20% in YouTube, but Kompas, Detik.com with the 1,000 and million readers, they will read our discussion, our paper, and so on. So this is the first activities, you know, the polling center of LP3S. Before we have, before LSE, and others, yeah, we are the first, yeah, established the polling before 1998, yeah, and then we were doing quick count, yeah, predicting 1 hour after final, you know, election, then we publish the result of the quick count. Yeah, the result of the quick count and KPU almost similar, not almost similar, the same. Yeah, so there is no chance for the KPU or other to cheat, yeah, the election. Yeah, if we in the Philippines there are 20 or 30 institutions doing the polling, but maybe only 2 or 3 perfect, yeah, because they are not politicking the research. Yeah, we have so many pollster, but politicking the result of the survey. Yeah, so we invite the President Carter, yeah, from the Carter Center at the time. Yeah, here the right side of Carter, yeah, Mr. Hussein, the head of the polling center, yeah, together with Fajar, yeah, we are still the best in the polling survey activities. Yeah. The second, we have public discussion. Yeah, yeah. Dr. Wijayanto continuously doing this public discussion, and we close to the media. Yeah, and a lot of media, if we have a discussion, a lot of media release our discussion. So there are so many dissemination of our ideas in discussion, in this discussion. Yeah? And then 100 social political scientists. Yeah, why 100? Yeah, yeah, that's catchy. Yeah, actually maybe this is more than 100, but we have to. We will be together 100 people doing a discussion, writing ideas. Yeah. In 1 year, continuously, yeah, this will be spectacular scholar activities. Yeah, I think there is no university or institution doing this before. Yeah, and then the fourth, yeah, we have Outlook Democracy, evaluate 2020 situation of democracy, and then we predict what will be happen in 2021. Yeah. And then, and then we have Sekolah Demokrasi. Yeah? Sekolah Demokrasi is, this is a very good design, yeah, to arrange togetherness between political activism, yeah, politician, and then the media, journalists, and then scholars and others, yeah, to work together discussing about the democracy, yeah, the ideas of democracy, and in the future, next 10 or 20 years, they will be the leaders in this country because they are selected, very selected. Some of them a member of the parliament in the provincial level, and then the leaders in, for example, Saudara Tommy, Mr. Tommy is chairman of the research and development of Democrat, the vice president of Agus Ahaye, and this will be continued in LP3S. And then this is the picture also, and then we have ongoing research, Ibu Yatun involved in this, I'm not, Professor Ward also involved in this research, in this cyber troop research, And then the second, this is the LP3S together with CSIS and then like PMFB, University of Indonesia, the release in the media is quite significant day by day, from December 2019 to December 2020. Before LP3S not so high in the media release, but now quite significant. And then for the future, long term, for the future and long term planning, we established the Center for Media and Democracy. Why? Because democracy still will be a very hot topic and crucial. And we, as Ibu Yatun mentioned and others, we have democratic regression, digital dictatorship, digital authoritarian, because according Yuval Harari, AI, big data, social media in hand of the state, because they have resources, money and so on, will be more powerful and potential to be authoritarian, in hand of the government, the state, if there is no check and balance. As Prof. Budi mentioned, so this is the early warning, and LP3S will be the institution that will continue to control from the civil society. I think that's all, concluding remark, all my presentation. Terima kasih. Kesimpulannya, Bapak Ibu sekalian, LP3S, I'll speak in bahasa. LP3S itu sudah berumur 50 tahun, Sejarahnya panjang. Sebagai contoh, prismanya saja, sebagai kesimpulan ini, prismanya saja, kalau kita mempelajari tahun 71 sampai 2021, di situ scholar terbaik menulis di situ. Profesor Sumitro, Abdurrahman Wahid, Taufik Abdullah, Arif Budiman, semua menulis. Kalau ada mahasiswa doktor atau master mau meneliti tentang sejarah pemikiran politik di Indonesia, cukup mengambil detail-detail prisma itu dari tahun 70 sampai sekarang. Ya tentu pastinya ditambah dengan sumber-sumber lain. Dan kemudian itu generasi lama. Generasi baru sekarang di sini ada Mas Herlambang, kemudian Mas Wija, saya sendiri, itu meneruskan generasi yang lama, dan terus akan fokus kepada demokrasi. Sebelum itu, kira-kira 30 tahun yang lalu, ada namanya SESDA. SESDA itu yang bikin saya, yang menyingkat saya, Center for Democracy. Dulu kalau kita bikin nama Center for Media Demokrasi, pasti diberangus dulu. Mengapa? Oh, ini mau ngutik-ngutik negara, kalau Center for Demokrasi berarti ini musuh negara pada zaman Orde Baru. Maka dari itu kita bikin SESDA, Nah, itu Center for Development and Democracy. Jadi ada developmentnya. Disembunyikan demokrasinya, padahal itu untuk demokrasi, Selamat malam. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Professor Didi, for the insightful remarks. I think this evening we have a portrait of initiative LP3S for spreading or developing the civil society in Indonesia. Now we are moving to anti-corruption topics. As we may understand that anti-corruption movement mostly relate to civil society, whether personal or group or organization. And tonight, our speaker, Dr. Wijayanto, will reveal some facts that academic also involved in movement for spreading positive vibe in anti-corruption. Dr. Wijayanto currently serves as a head program of international undergraduate program of government studies at Department of Political Science, Universitas Diponegoro. And I think lots of students, regular students, as well as international students that also join us this evening, right? And Dr. Wijayanto holds doctoral degree from Leiden University with dissertation about media and politics. So please welcome Dr. Wijayanto.
Ya, terima kasih Pak Gulam. Thank you so much for your kind and generous introduction. Sorry, backlight. I have to. I'm back. Saya kembali. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude for being here tonight with wonderful speakers. Sebelumnya saya ingin mengawali dengan yang saya hormati Pak WR1, Pak Dekan, Bu Kadep, Pak Wadek 1, Bu Kaprodi, Bapak Ibu sekalian, tentu saja para speakers yang sudah bicara sebelum saya, Prof. Merinalim, Dr. Yatun, Prof. Didi, ada Pak Yuwanto, dan juga semua students ya. Sekarang jam 10 kurang 10 menit. I hope the students are not sleeping yet, but counting the number is still almost 300. I think it's because I told them early today that today Prof. Merinalim, Dr. Yatun will come to your campus, right, from far away. In the study of digital democracy, they're like, you know, the Beatles in music or Coldplay, yeah? So if you don't attend the webinar, you will miss Coldplay playing in your own home, right? Or you miss the Beatles. So I think that's the reason why they're here, yeah? Thank you for still staying with us until now. Pak Gulam, please allow me to share my screen to present my my talk. So as you can see here, the title of my presentation would be Cyber Terror, Academic Alliance on Anti-Corruption and Democratic Regression in Indonesia. I combined my slides English and Indonesian, so everyone can follow it easily. Nanti juga saya akan komunikasikan dengan bahasa Indonesia dalam presentasi saya. So this is a very specific case study about very specific but very important one. I will say about the revision of KPK law back to 2019. In this revision, a lot of protests from students, from activists, from academics, for so many reasons, even from the leaders of the KPK themselves. This is their view. The independence of KPK will be under threat, and also the power of this anti-corruption body will be weakened, and so on. You can see in the list here. And also because at that time, KPK was very much trusted by the people. You know, 83.1% public trust the KPK, based on a survey by ICAS in 2017. While the institution that revised the KPK, which is the House of Representatives, come from political parties, were the two institutions that were trusted the less. Ya. Jadi yang paling tidak percaya, lembaga yang paling tidak percaya mau merevisi lembaga yang paling percaya publik. So it's ironical back then. The revisi Undang-Undang KPK is also a challenge, because a lot of the KPK back then performs a very good performed a very good job. You can see here, in the case of local leaders that were caught by KPK were increasing, right? And it also reflects that we still need the strong KPK. Pak Gulam, can you see can you hear my voice clearly?
Because yes, very clearly.
Thank you. So that's why there's an alliance of academics across universities. This is one of the example of the news, that protested the revision. And actually, not just academic outside, but also Diponegoro University students and academic. This is the news from Kompas, but you can read here, mahasiswa Universitas Diponegoro menandatangani petisi penolakan terhadap revisi undang-undang KPK. So we should be proud of ourselves, the FISIP UNDIP students, FISIP UNDIP academics. Right, this is another news about us protesting the revision. And this is Pak WR 1 Pak Wadek 1 dan kawan-kawan. So we're protesting back then. But then something happens. There was a terror towards the anti-corruption and also opinion leaders, academic opinion leaders that protested the law. So there is a question would be in this paper, in this presentation, how did internet or social media, WhatsApp groups in this case, empower the academic alliance on anti-corruption? How did the cyber terror weaken the alliance? And what does this terror mean for Indonesian democracy? So that will be very simple questions to be answered tonight. So I hope I will be able to answer it clearly. The research method for this is a combination of in-depth interview, media social analysis, and also digital ethnography. So first, I would like to make clear about what cyber terror is. So cyber terror, according to Eric Louis, is defined as action deliberately or deliberate action that threaten both illegal that use illegal means or threats. Be it done by one person or groups towards the integrity, secrecy, and also system of information processing. With this following one or more of these following impacts. Jadi dengan dampak satu atau lebih konsekuensi berikut ini, suffering, serious injuries or death of people, psychological effect to the community, economic loss, ecological threat, and also threat to the stability and social cohesion, and political and social cohesion. Jadi kalau ada satu saja dari dampak ini terjadi, teror digital yang punya satu saja dari dampak ini, maka dia disebut sebagai teror. So let's see, let's take a look at the case. So first, I would like to show you that actually this protest was, initiated through a WhatsApp group. This is the example of how the WhatsApp group look like. Jadi dimulai dari WhatsApp group, lalu kemudian di-share. So there's a representation of its campus from UI, UGM, Undip, all over Indonesia. Representasi dari masing-masing kampus, they join in this WhatsApp group, and then the representation of its campus, they initiate the petition among themselves. Jadi saya misalnya menjadi representasi dari Undip, gitu, mengkoordinasi yang ada di Undip bersama beberapa kawan. Lalu di UGM ada, dan dari UI ada, IPB, UNAN, dan seterusnya. Jadi tidak semua yang mendukung petisi itu, ada ribuan itu masuk di WhatsApp group, tapi hanya perwakilan dari masing-masing kampus. And it was successful to influence the agenda of the media, the coverage For instance, this one, Pak Jokowi 1000 lebih dosen dari UGM hingga UI tolak revisi Undang-Undang KPK. That's for an example. And this is the picture, ya, how the movement, petisi yang dimulai dari WhatsApp group, in just couple of days, it was spread out all over Indonesia, ya, dari mulai Sumatera sampai dengan pulau-pulau kecil di sini nih ya, Unhair, Unhas di Sulawesi, ya, Undana, Unam, Unram, Unair, UGM, UNS, Undip, UNES, IPB, ITB, so all over Indonesia. Hanya dimulai dari WhatsApp group. In Kalimantan too, Gorontalo as well. So you can see here, yeah, the power of the internet, of the social media, of the WhatsApp group in this case. In total, almost 3,000 lecturers from 41 universities in 22 provinces. Bayangkan kalau kita hidup di zaman tahun 90-an, nggak ada internet, gitu, apalagi sebelum ada telepon dan sebagainya, kita harus kumpul. Like in the time of youth pledge, ya, sebuah pemuda. It's impossible. In a couple of days, we can organize, we can initiate this very big scope of movement. However, sayangnya ya, unfortunately, yang sudah semangat di WhatsApp group ya, in the WhatsApp group, then there was a hack ya, peretasan to one of the admin of the WhatsApp group. This is Pak Rimawan, Mas Rimawan is from UGM. He is one of the initiator of the admin of the WhatsApp group. Suddenly spread this kind of news. Yang awalnya menolak revisi Undang-Undang KPK, suddenly he supported the revisi. KPK saat ini tidak diawasi, saat mungkin disetir orang seorang, mari dukung revisi Undang-Undang KPK. You know, that morning when I got this message, I was surprised. Not that morning, ya. So this is the record here. This is from my own cell phone. 17.04 sore hari. I was surprised loh. Tiba-tiba Mas Rimawan yang menjadi inisiator gerakan, salah satunya dari UGM, tiba-tiba mendukung revisi pesan seperti ini. But then kata-katanya aneh banget, tidak tampak seperti Mas Rimawan banget ya. Dan juga caps lock. Caps lock itu salah satu ciri hack biasanya pakai caps lock. But then peretasan itu diikuti dengan telepon dari berbagai nomor di dunia. You can see here terjadi kepanikan dalam WhatsApp group itu. Banyak ada yang laporan screenshot ini, saya mendapat teror telepon dari berbagai nomor dari seluruh dunia, gonta-ganti. Izin left, please allow me to leave this group. I also got hacked. Please allow me to leave. So those academics one by one leave the WhatsApp group. You know, while they are the coordinators of each campus. So the effect is, you know, is various ya, mulai dari psychological terror ya, feeling paranoia and also under pressure, you know, feeling that salah satu narasumber merasa terus dipantau, seperti tidak hanya secara online tapi offline. Jadi the impact of that online terror, that cyber terror, also impact their real life, and they become always, always paranoid, always, cautious about everything. You know, they also it also weakened the movement. Yeah, because one of the narasumber, one of the informants told us that, you know, it impacted our consolidation. You know, one of the coordinator, our friend from UGM, told me that, you know, I'm the director of this very reputable institution. I want to coordinate with my friends, with the other students, you know, because there were protests too. However, I couldn't use my cell phone because this foreign number kept calling me hours ya, berjam-jam di telepon terus, jadi nggak bisa telepon siapa-siapa, nggak bisa mengkoordinasikan gerakan. And it also lost the trust to the authority, yeah, because when I asked them, would you report? Did you report your case? no, they were not. They didn't report the case because in their experience, kalau aktivismenya adalah mengkritik kekuasaan, itu kasusnya lambat, lapor juga percuma. Tapi sebaliknya jika mendukung kekuasaan gitu, dan kemudian orang yang mendukung itu mendapat teror, cepat, seperti kasus di Sragen misalnya. And there was a joke as well among those activists. Tuh, saya tidak mungkin lapor ke polisi, malah jadiin kasus kita yang lama, di mana suka demo itu ya, suka protes. So that's a joke. And you know, this part is about how, despite a lot of articles about this. It's time to sleep, okay? Sorry, everyone. There's a cyber truck comes to my place, my room, and so this picture was actually how the despite teror yang sudah dialami oleh para aktivis anti korupsi itu ya. In the end, they because of not despite ya, but because of karena teror itu maka gerakannya melemah sehingga tidak berhasil untuk semakin menguat dan memengaruhi opini publik. Survei Kompas in the 16th September said that 44.9% of Indonesians public supported the revision. Those who didn't support, only 39.9. So I was wondering, and I was thinking, if the aliens didn't get terror, perhaps they will be able to influence more the public opinion. But this was the result. What we can reflect from this case, you know, a while ago, Prof. Melinalnim, she was here, presenting her wonderful presentation in her article entitled "Many Clicks but Little Stick." She was still optimistic. The internet could strengthen the movement, the media activism, social media activism, even though could also even though social media activism sometimes is not it's not successful when associated with low risk action and congruent with the meta narrative. But social media activism is more likely to successful mobilize mass support when its narrative are simple. In the case of KPK back then, in that article, it was successful, right? But now it's not. I mean, in the last 2019. So there's a still mixture of conclusion. It can be supportive and it may not be supportive, depend on the context. And also Stepsel in 2017, sorry about that, I forget to put the year here. Also, still optimistic. It can strengthen the citizens, although it can also strengthen or empower the oligarchy at the same time. So tadi Pak Gula menyampaikan dengan sangat baik ya, seperti dua sisi mata koin, mata uang ya. However, lately Stepsel in 2021, he made a more pessimistic tone in his book From Grassroots Activism to Disinformation, Social Media in Southeast Asia. And the recent studies on the social media, they were become more pessimistic, because in the like what Bunte wrote in the conclusion of this book, that social media have strengthened the autocratic regime to become more autocratic, and unstabilized democracy like Indonesia become undemocratic or turning into authoritarianism. So it's the trend of the study is more pessimistic, just like the case of cyber terror. This is the article from I'm Sin Peng, yeah, that also emphasized the political authoritarianism and the digital media. So a few days ago, I was invited by SafeNet to discuss about their report. And you can see in the last 3 years, the title of their book, you know, at 2018, it's still 2018 judulnya masih jalan terjal memperjuangkan hak digital. Lalu 2019 judulnya sudah ngeri, bangkitnya otoritarian digital. Lalu kemudian 2020 represi digital di tengah pandemi. And the state of digital rights in Indonesia in SafeNet's report is Siaga 1 in 2019, Siaga 2 2020, and they fear that it will be a complete digital authoritarianism in the future. So, well, despite all of the pessimism, I will conclude with this report from FIDEM, yeah. They were optimistic, yeah. Even though in one hand, autocration is on the rise, the search of autocration, but resistance also grows. Yeah, I think the case of cyber terrorists toward academic reflect this, yeah. In one hand, the social media have strengthened the protests toward the revision in the case of academic alliance. However, the cyber terror significantly weakened their movement too. So I come with more nuanced argument, even though the pessimistic tone is perhaps stronger. It will be, I hope, something to discuss in the discussion session. Thank you, Pak Gulam. I will give the screen back to you.
Thank you for your thoughtful remarks, Dr. Wijayanto. And it's getting late evening, and we now move to a different topic about civic engagement and democracy. Will be presented by Dr. Yuwanto. Dr. Yuwanto currently serves as head of the Social Science Doctoral Program at Universitas Diponegoro, and he earned a doctoral degree from Sogang University of Korea with the dissertation on voluntary association and social capital in South Korea's democratic consolidation. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Yuwanto.
Thank you, Pak Zunuwanus Kulamanar, the moderator. Good evening, everyone. It's getting late, but actually the night is still young. And I'm sure that all of us are still excited. Thank you to the committee for inviting me. Thanks to moderator once again, previous speakers, Professor Budistiono, Dr. Hardiwarsono, Professor Didi Rabini, Professor Merlina Lim, Dr. Yatun Sastramijaya, and Dr. Wijayanto. Due to the problem of my laptop, so I asked to the committee helping me to operate my PPT slides. I'm sorry, and thank you for Mas Shehuddin. Ladies and gentlemen, the topic for me is promoting civic engagement and democracy in the era of digital revolution. Therefore, firstly, I will describe the development of civic engagement and democracy, particularly related to the weakening and losing of civic engagement through social media, dealing with the phenomenon of the rise of authoritarianism. This is a kind of development that pits the civil society vis-a-vis the governments or ruling elites. Secondly, from the word promoting civic engagement, we still have optimism that indeed civic engagement can still be promoted in this digital revolution era. Therefore, it's crucial for us to look back at the importance of civic engagement for democracy, the various forms of digital civic engagement, including inherent challenges of digital civic engagement. And lastly, we can discuss to find common views on how to promote civic engagement against authoritarianism, illiberalism, and the like. Okay, the next slide, please. Let's look at the first point, namely the development of digital civic engagement and democracy, including its effectiveness. For that purpose, I will follow the main arguments of the last year Isia's book edited by M. Sin Peng and Ross Tapsell, entitled From Grassroots Activism to Disinformation, subtitle Social Media in Southeast Asia, to explain this point. So it says that social media has contributed to genuine expansion of grassroots activism in the early stages of its inception in Southeast Asia. That digital activism has been able to take hold in the region in varying times was made possible largely because Southeast Asian states had left the online space alone. Slow and reluctant state interventions in the cyberspace had provided political opportunities for existing civic groups to expand and new ones to emerge. However, these states recognized the threats of social media could pose to the political security of the governing parties. They, in turn, have begun to exploit social media affordance to manipulate public opinion for their gains. Next, please. So, with increasingly repressive and manipulative use of social media tools undertaken by governments, there is widespread concern that social media is fueling anti-democratic elements of society rather than grassroots reformists. Some scholars even regard social media as a key driver of authoritarianism and repression. The increasing use of social media to manipulate public opinion has emerged as one of the greatest threats to democracy in recent years. So, in short, if social media was seen as instruments of liberation a decade ago, they are today considered a major threat to democracy and human freedom. Digital media are regarded as providing fertile ground for the rise of authoritarianism, strongmen, and right-wing groups, accelerating and deepening the current wave of autocratization. Ladies and gentlemen, things that have just been mentioned do generate pessimism, but I choose to take an optimistic position. So let's move to the next point about our optimism that civic engagement, including digital civic engagement, still and will determine the prospects for the survival and maturity of our democracy. Next slide, please. Above all, I do believe that the formal mechanisms of democracy rely on strong civic engagement for their legitimacy and efficacy. Citizens can contribute effectively to society in a diverse range of ways, but citizens must also have the necessary information and evidence and the skills to engage critically with this to make informed and empowered decisions. And today, it is widely recognized that digital technologies offer exciting opportunities to facilitate a stronger and more inclusive civil society. Around the world, energetic and wide-ranging efforts are being made to harness the potential of digital technologies to mobilize civic action at any levels. At the same time, we are only just beginning to understand the impacts that digital technologies may have on the norms and nature of public life. The opportunities are exciting, but the challenges are significant and complex. Inherently, however, while digital penetration and skills have increased, the potential for digital technologies to contribute to strengthen democratic processes is currently undermined by significant discrepancies in the use of the internet across different groups in society. These differences can be a result of varying access to technology and infrastructure, varying skills and abilities, and social and cultural factors. Groups that are particularly unrepresented in the digital sphere are older generations, and those with disabilities and digital skills also differ according to income level and region. The ways in which different groups use digital technologies also varies significantly, with many more young people accessing social media sites and online news. In the context of young people, I think it will be also important to us to discuss about digital civic engagement by millennials, which refers to civic engagement activities specifically done by young people and involving digital media of some kind. Digital civic engagement here is a repertoire of practice that falls under digital citizenship and that assumes and requires digital literacy in order to happen. Shortly, digital literacy is necessary to enact digital citizenship. Therefore, effort to promote citizen engagement, for one thing, could also be based on this issue. Ladies and gentlemen, why is digital civic engagement by young people important? What do we know about the nature of digital civic engagement by millennials? We do know several things that bring our optimism, such as millennials around the world use the internet to seek news. They discuss political problems with other people online. There is some evidence that digital civic engagement by youth may be more equitable than traditional forms of civic engagement. Also, digital civic engagement by millennials is positively correlated to offline youth political participation. Online youth participation, even when not explicitly political in nature, is correlated to higher political engagement online and off. And of course, humor, memes, satire, and other acts of engaging with or remixing popular culture are important tactics in the repertoire of digital civic engagement by millennials. So while the very existence of digital technologies is a key enabler of youth civic engagement, the same technologies and platforms may be significant deterrents or barriers to civic engagement. I would like to mention about such activities as a key enablers. Firstly, equitable access to technology and digital skills. This is very important because the availability of broadband network coverage, ownership of digital devices, and the ability to access and benefit from the internet are important factors which can determine youth engagement online. Secondly, civic education. Civic education, I mean formal civic education in schools is an important step in creating awareness of children's rights as citizens and of the possibilities for action in the civic space and also open civic space. The third thing, open civic space, means accessible and inclusive civic space is vital for adolescents and youth to feel able to take part in a social movement for change. However, the well-documented phenomenon on shrinking civic space sees increasing threats and restrictions to civic freedoms, including internationally guaranteed freedoms to facilitate participation in democratic processes. And barriers to civic engagement are first, lack of trust. Yeah. I'm not going to go further in detail, but lack of trust. One of the potential barriers to digital civic engagement is lack of trust among or by young people, both trust in digital platforms and the internet in general as an open, transparent, and neutral conduit for expression and trust. And the second, harassment and trolling. The third one, data and surveillance. Why data and surveillance? Through every act of expression online, indelible traces of information about a person are generated, which can be used, analyzed, stored, and sold by unintended parties, is particularly problematic when such data are collected from a child or an adolescent as their digital footprint follows them into adulthood, even though their attitude, preferences, and identity may change over time. And now we are talking about promoting civic engagement. Talking about promoting civic engagement and democracy, actually, we are talking about two directions. It means that the direction is not only towards the effort to resist various forms of social media, disinformation that reinforce authoritarianism, but also inward by looking at how the nature and form of civic engagement, especially digital one, is conducive to democratization. Those who wish to support youth or millennial participation, I think will not only need to understand how millennials chooses to engage in a given context, but also to what extent the prevailing political, social, economic, or environment situations of a country spurs them into action or deters them from participating. In other words, in order to support children and young people to participate in a civic life through online engagement, we need to understand what they care about and what motivates them to speak out. In turn, we need to better understand whether current support to millennial engagement, digital or blended or offline, properly reflects these motivations. And finally, we cannot choose to support young people in their quest for online political or civic expression without paying attention to the context of the digital media ecosystem, including the opportunities and risks involved. So now I reach the epilogue of my presentation. So we can conclude that millennials nowadays are engaging actively in their communities and in the socio-political scene, but they do it in a peculiar way, which has not yet been adopted or acknowledged by the media and older generations. But many scholars have argued whether the internet is able to build social capital, and it is. Online communities have emerged in times of turmoil, allowing people to effectively advocate for social change and to show unity through their homogeneous messages, slogans, and collective action. So, yeah, without any doubt, I choose take a position as a pessimism, not a pessimism, I'm sorry, but optimism. I am optimistic about the future of a civic engagement and democracy, especially digital civic engagement in this era. I think that's all of my presentation, and thank you for your attention, and good night.
Thank you, Dr. Yuanto, for the thoughtful presentation. And I think it is time that we waiting for the discussion, question and answer. And if we take a look at the chat room, we have several questions. In my note, we have 5 participants that are asking question to Dr. Yatun. Some already answered, but I will allocate time for you to elaborate some of the answer for the question. And also for Professor Merlina Lim, I think we have 2 questions from the participant regarding binary politics from Tommy, and also from Pradipa Rashidi about technopolitics. Yeah. And we also have question from Harisma Melati for both Professor Merlina and also Dr. Yatun. I think it is on the last part of the chat room. And one question goes to all of the speaker from Pradita Andari regarding women participation on politics. So I think the first, I would like to ask Dr. Yatun for responding the question.
Thank you very much, Mas Gulam.
Yes.
I responded indeed, and now I can see that I'm getting old because focusing on the talk and while responding to questions in the chat is doing a lot to my brain. The first question was actually very interesting by Nafirotul Karima about the future of digital activism in Southeast Asia, especially in Indonesia, as there's been so many unfavorable terms about democracy. That's a very important question, and I replied in the chat also. That actually the future of digital activism is on the one hand non-digital and the other hand alternatively digital, because what we see, a lot of these negative effects of social media, both as outlined by Yuanto, but also in the more authoritarian terms as discussed by Mas Wija, all this happens in platforms that are owned by social media giants. So Facebook, WhatsApp, Twitter, and everything. And what I can see is that, I mean, young people are very much more tech savvy than we are, and they see that happening as well. So there is a movement away from these social media giants. And they use different kind of platforms that are, much more concerned with privacy and things like that. For instance, Clubhouse in Thailand is very popular now. To escape indeed this algorithmic enclaves and this regime controls and also corporate controls and commercialization of their data. So that's one thing. And another thing is what I can then here say, called rhizomatic expansion, not only on digital platforms, but also towards more analog grassroots movements. Because the thing is, the experience of protest, both on the streets and on social media, has acquainted them with all kinds of grassroots movement that they vaguely perhaps knew about, but now had actually the chance to engage with these issues. So people are actually becoming curious, young people, they reach out also to these movements. So these movements, I would definitely also recommend, please open yourselves up to these youth who are very curious about these issues and want to join. Yes, be inclusive of this generation. Another question was about, the student movement of the 1970s and how that compares to the student movement now. And one thing that we learned a lot from the late 1970s student movement which was actually very promising, very strong, ideologically very sound, was that they had one very weak point, and that is the vulnerability to physical state repression, right? With all the raids of the campuses and everything, it just died out, except for some elements who remained active underground or joined NGOs like LP3S, to continue their activism there. And student movements today, because they are still rooted in that tradition and in the repertoires of that tradition, they also are rooted in the same vulnerabilities of repression. So it might help then if these student movements would also just join the wider assemblage of youth protest, which might strengthen their position. And finally, I had one answer to Mas Wahid about whether the rhythm is also influenced by political cultures. And yes, they are for certain, because a rhythm is not really a thing, right? It's just a metaphor for a process, for a type of process. And this process will also manifest very differently in different local and national contexts. And there, this process is constantly also being transformed itself by the influence of local cultures and local conditions. So this is also why it keeps transforming and therefore remains flexible and, according to Deleuze and Guattari, then also unbreakable in that sense. What I didn't respond to yet was a question by Zulhat Mahdi. Thank you for all these questions. If the regime can always adapt to dominate the media, how to protect public opinion from regime manipulation? Well, this is obviously something that youth can't do alone. This has to be a very broad movement, and which is currently led in Indonesia by Mas Wijayanto here, against digital authoritarianism. Of course, Damar Juniarto with his SafeNet is also very active here. So these movements need to be strengthened and broadened also. And especially for youth and students, how to protect them, but also, protecting themselves by indeed going to different kinds of platforms and one thing, though, that they could do more, and this relates to the other question the general question by Pradita Andari, is to strengthen the protective field against women who suffer online harassment, which is often very, very brutal, very unethical, and very intimidating, especially if you feel like you're being alone, being attacked. So this is something that should get much more attention, and both netizens and organizations should really strengthen this protective shield against misogynist, anti-women violence online as well as offline, obviously. And I'm not sure if I answered all the questions now, actually. Did I forget one, Mas Golam?
Yes, from the last one from Pratipa, I think it's just about the what kind of factors that contribute to regime control on the internet.
Mm-hmm. the trend towards analog grassroots movements, which happens in the midst of attempts at making Southeast Asia the next tech hub. Yeah, especially all the Southeast Asian countries are now competing, right? Jakarta wants to be the tech hub of the region, but so does Singapore and Malaysia. I wonder what external factors might contribute beyond regime control in the internet. I'm not sure what you mean here, Pradipa. What kind of external factors?
Maybe so, the factors that comes from outside the government.
So the whole industrial push also for this tech thing. Yeah. Well, the thing about companies and industries is that they're very much commercially oriented. So if millennials, Gen Z, like they're being told now, think that their future is necessarily in digital entrepreneurship, in these formal technological hubs, then this will strengthen their position, and that governments and industries here will strike a stronger alliance because they meet each other's interests, economic interests. But here is something that youth can do also by saying, no, we don't necessarily want to be part of that tech hub because it is so completely separated from our civic concerns as young citizens with democracy and everything. So you can also call these tech companies to account and show as youth that we want more democratization, both online and offline. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but maybe if I thank you so much.
You're welcome, Dr. Yatun. And now I think the opportunity goes to Professor Marlina Lim. I think this evening we have lots of fans of you and like to invite you to Indonesia, to the classroom. Please, Professor Marlina.
Thank you. First one is about the binary politics. So from Tommy Satriatomo, yes. Thank you for the questions. So it is, the binary politic is not a permanent feature, but it is dominant one, not only in Indonesia, it's everywhere, right? However, I have to reiterate that it is not merely caused by algorithm and user dynamic per se. It's actually rooted in the political discourse that already existed prior to social media. We had already had binary, right? Like under Suharto, it was binary. And then you have Reformasi. Reformasi was binary as well, because we had to simplify. Sometimes you need to do this binary discourse in order to mobilize. Otherwise, it's very hard to unite. However, now it's become more, instead of temporal, it's become a permanent feature of at least 20 years of political structure. So the core of the problem is not algorithm per se. Algorithm exacerbate and amplify what is already there within our political discourse and political system. So if you look at US and Canada, for example, or Netherlands in that matter, right? There is a vast difference between the way political discourse is carried out precisely because the system is different. The US is extreme binary, has been like that for hundreds of years. You either Republican or Democrats, right? And there are coalition in the Dutch system or Canadian system, but people are not necessarily always divided into two. And that's the danger. If Indonesia is like model the US in terms of everybody always belong to X or Y, which is they are like that carry on to the media doesn't really accommodate. Therefore, it will become permanent. It's very hard to change anything that is entrenched for hundreds of years. We are not there yet, but I'm not sure. It is not depends on the social media per se. Social media will take whatever is already there, right? The spirits of the politic is actually more within the structure itself. So the politic to be less binary, the system grouping based or grouping based on ideology or else need to accommodate diverse groupings. And the media system needs to be a fertile ground for diverse discourse to emerge. Second question from Pradipa Rasidi about early thinking on the internet. So yes, you are right about the more utopian, optimistic thinking that dominated early thoughts, early theories about the internet in politics. And then it was followed later by a later wave of dystopian and or dystopianism or pessimistic. This was very North American. American was utopian, and then European followed with dystopian. It's like always like, especially German and French, it's like, right? It's later. And that's a repeat for every single technology. But I, not only myself, but there's also some critical scholars of media has long been arguing, my dissertation was arguing against both. Both are misleading. I'm neither utopian or dystopian or optimistic or pessimistic. I think people read what they wanted to read, right? I think they are largely technologically deterministic, neglecting societal construction of the technology and the agency of their users. I think and I've been reviewing a lot of case studies from Indonesia. It's been flowering and it's like beautiful in the last 10 years. However, there is lacking of broader thinking that when you look at the case study, it is whatever happened within that context, but necessarily reflect the very complex relationship between technology and politics, which is dynamic and is complex. And I'm not necessarily claiming that I explain everything, but I'll really know what I'm looking at, right? So my argument has been in looking at technology-society relationship, including technopolitic, we need to center human experiences and how they embrace, and we have to embrace the complexity of people's life and realities, recognizing the nuance, right? The nuances that they experience. So people are neither always X or Y. And so that's why I think it goes to another question about, I think there is a question about methods. That's why I think if we keep using the same tool in doing research, when we use the hammer, everything looks like nails. And that's including how you read other people's work. You read it because you have hammer, everything looks like nails. I think how to deliberate ourselves from the tendency of keep using the same tool is actually very hard, because every discipline, you use the same tool and then you are familiar, you are comfortable with one thing, right? So my invitation is that to challenge yourself to look differently. So I'm experimental, I'm interdisciplinary scholar, not because I insist to be, but because the kind of problems I want to answer necessitate interdisciplinary knife. That I cannot have just one knife. So when it comes to, I think there is about qualitative methodology, right? Yeah, I'm very qualitative. But what is qualitative anyway? It's just like, I think going back to centering people experience is that in my research, I should be able to read phenomenon, that's why I use sort of computational mapping, because I know to know how people collectivize as a group, right? So it's a sort of larger context. If I follow just very traditional ethnographic, which is like snowballs, following the snowball sampling, you wouldn't get anywhere, because you go to the field, you don't know, you probably want to talk with political figure or whatever, right? But we have youth, new set of actors who behave differently. They are leader online. Nobody knows them of in their villages, for example, right? So how to combine and actually invent new methods because you want to understand people better. That's what lead you to different kind of, so I combine many methods from interviews to observing and content analysis, discourse analysis, critical discourse analysis, historiography, but also computational mapping, because that's where my question actually lead me. I could talk more about it, but this is too little time to, but I hope that's sort of like basically to be open to learn new tools in order to understand people and group of people better. Is there any other?
Yes, actually we have question from Harisma Melati, and I forgot to mention about Dr. Yatun maybe at the end of the session. It's about academic who are members of the buzzer funded by the Indonesian government.
Yeah, I suppose I could get a hint. I think it's complex, right? It's not like a needle that you have these people, you inject more money, that people, and then there are more followers. I think in general people are grouped based on cognitive bias and cognitive dissonance, and people come out online because they know their opinion resonates with this leader who are funded. So it's not like I'm not worried about that. I think these are not healthy for democratics, or let's say just simply for a very healthy conversation. Having said that, they don't have this all power. They're not like all powerful actors that will determine people to think. I think we underestimate people. We might not hear people. So most people are invisible, right? We see just people who are very loud online. That's why I think to really talk to people who are silent, for example, in my research is very useful, because people have more complex or more nuanced opinion when they don't say it. So yes, we should be worried about this kind of funded, buzzer. Having said that, we shouldn't believe or disillusion that they will damage democracy, or making any big claim such as they might steer people's opinion. I think they probably just confirm some people who already have pre-existing beliefs that are similar to their opinions.
Okay, I think that's all the question that goes to you, Professor Marlina.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just before to another speaker, I would like to back to Dr. Yatun for responding the same question about the buzzer funded by the Indonesian government. It is asked by Harisma Melati.
Yeah, very good question. And I'm not sure about the academics. Maybe Mas Wija can comment on that, because I'm not aware of many academics actually being on the payroll for the Indonesian government, at least not at Undip. But buzzers in general, the big problem there is that, I mean, they're not the only ones shouting online, right? I mean, there's a lot of countering of buzzers, buzzer RP, that kind of hashtag. It's very big. Everyone knows that buzzers are there and everyone opposes them. But the problem is that, they have a lot of resources, very vague, secretive resources, many of which can be traced to political actors, regime actors and everything. So as long as they can keep making use of these public funds, they will always win the narrative just by sheer masses and the resources they have to do so. So what we can do about that is to try to expose, the public funds and say that this is absolutely not okay to use, people's taxpayers' money to fund propaganda this way. And this is one of their main concerns in the Cyber Troops project that I'm doing with Mas Wija. you know, to, even if we don't get to expose the exact individuals, we at least can get to expose the mechanism that it does exist and that this needs to stop because, first of all, it's public funding, you know, it's money that you should build roads with, schools, rather than fund propaganda with. So yeah, making that known is very important. And just to link up with what Madlena just said, in our Cyber Truths project, we also do a mixed method approach. So it's very true what Madlena says. You can't get the whole picture just by doing computational analysis or just by doing interviews. But the complementing of these methods, including also digital ethnography, which is the third method that we apply, that gives a very, very, never complete, but very full and rich picture where you can see different sides of the same phenomenon. And for the buzzer phenomenon, the cyber truth phenomenon, this is very important because their influence is, yeah, it's too big for democracy. There's no democracy where run by buzzer politics. I'll just leave it to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yatun. And now I think I'd like to ask Professor Didi for the question from Pradita Andari about the participation of women in politics.
Nggak ngerti saya, Pak. Women in politics.
Okay.
Jadi
okay. Yes. Maybe we are directly to Pak Wija. Since also respond from the Harismas Melati question about buzzer funded by the government. Please, Pak Wija.
Thank you, Pak Gulam. First of all, yeah, I'm counting 184 participants still with us. It's almost 11, yeah. So it's very good. Yes, I think I will answer most of the questions from the students in the class, right? I rather to give time more to Prof. Melalim and Dr. Yatun while they are still here. But I just want to give a little bit remark, yeah, to the questions about how to strengthen the women political legislators who are female, about you know, the reality that our cyber or our social media is getting more violence. One of the way is, you know, we fear something that we don't know. So by increasing the digital literacy, you know, it will increase the digital resilience. Attending webinar like this is one of them. And Universitas Diponegoro and LPDGS will hold the summer school, Sekolah Musim Panas, next August. The topic would be the same, you know, social media activism and digital resilience and resistance to democratic creation. But we make it in a summer course, 2-week summer course with a lot of materials, the theoretical one and also the method. We will introduce about the big data analysis, digital ethnography, as well as, you know, other method to understand this, the cyber world, yeah, and the social media. You know, Yuval Noah Harari said in his book Homo Sapiens, yeah, Sapiens, that, you know, this is a digital revolution. What that means is that, you know, in the history of mankind, every time we enter a new way of life, you know, from the berburu dan meramu, yeah, from the, you know, ancient time, you know, we're hunting. It took like thousands of years or perhaps millions of years before we found agriculture, right? And then it took thousands of years before we found in this industrial revolution. And now we're entering digital revolution just yesterday or just early this morning, like Prof. Lim said, yeah, still early in Canada. Because, you know, digital revolution just began perhaps in 90s. If, you know, every revolution of the way of humans' life last for thousands of years or sometimes millions of years, we're actually just in the beginning of it. And we still know very little about it. Yeah, that's why when you listen to Prof. Melnalim or Dr. Yatun, perhaps you students got confused. Don't worry, because it's this phenomena. Jadi situasi ini, revolusi digital ini masih baru awal di sebuah era yang sangat lama ke depan. Jadi kalau banyak hal yang masih misterius buat kita, banyak hal yang kalian tidak mengerti, that's normal. That's why we need to study it. Perhaps that would be my point, Pak Gulam. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Wija. And last but not least to Dr. Yuwanto.
Okay, terima kasih Pak Gulam. Yeah, so I just want to give my opinion. I mean, I always put faith and optimism in young people. They are the future of our democracy. Millennials do have a particular approach to civic and political engagement, challenging the assumptions and the inaccuracies of media bias. Millennials, young people, depict themselves as engaged and informed citizens eager to bring social change and to fight for their freedoms and rights. Perhaps with another change in generation and political beliefs, this young generation will accomplish a total reform in the nature and demands of citizenship and will thus become the kind of new control culture, setting new thresholds in terms of civic and political participation for the generation to follow them. Generation Z. I think that's enough from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yuwanto. And I think this is the end of this webinar. And I think it is pretty difficult for me to make a conclusion because I think we have very range of perspective, some with the sound optimistic, some with critical perspective. And I think it is very important to trigger our way of thinking about digital democracy. And I think this webinar is very important for us to open our eyes and raising our awareness about we have big homework actually to improve or to develop our democracy because in this digital era, I think not only about the research, not only about the publication, but also our attitude toward democracy also have to be in a good manner. I thank Professor Didik Rahbini and also Professor Melnalim and Dr. Yatun, Dr. Wijayanto, and Dr. Yuwanto for your time and for your ideas that share to the audience, to the student, because mostly is I think we have a lot of undergraduate students here, and hopefully it will inspire them as a student as well as a citizen. Once again, thank you, and hopefully we can meet again in another webinar. And I'd like also to thank to the committee, Pak Dr. NHS, and also Dr. Wija for arranging this webinar, Mas Danang, Mas Budi, Mas Syahudin, Mas Gary, and also Mas Maskur. And hopefully it will bring a different kind of perspective toward digital democracy. Thank you and very good evening for all of you.